welcome to our conversation, Perspectives on Policing. Today, we're going to have an open conversation, as we usually do, and it will be more solution-focused today. And we also have a guest with us, Ms. Trina Patterson. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself and your role?
Yes, sure. My name is Trina Patterson. I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Manager on the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Our office, a lot of people may not be familiar with the EDI office, but we are considered a support office for campus. And what that means is we provide the bridge, or fill in that gap between students, faculty, staff, and administration. We listen to what the students, staff, faculty, and staff have to say, what their needs are, and our role is to make sure that all of our campus community are feeling included, they're feeling heard, they're feeling a part of.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I also want to go ahead and have you, Kurt, introduce yourself, just in case people haven't seen the previous videos.
Right, and I'm not in uniform today either, so Officer Kurt Bergendahl, UW Parkside Police Department, one of the people that helped drive this conversation, and obviously a key person as far as law enforcement in this. By no means an expert in this, but learning with you all and working with our community to try to make our policing here better, but also to hopefully be a model for others and help our community understand what it is we do and why we do the things we do, but also to address your concerns, both our local community and our outlying communities in the area.
Thank you, Kurt. And again, I'm Paulette Bell. I'm a coordinator for retention programs in the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs. And I'm here as well to join in the conversation and help guide the conversation. Please know we definitely welcome you to join our conversation by commenting on either our Instagram live video or Facebook live video. And we'll be trying to keep up, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your question right here live on Instagram and Facebook. So again, I mentioned earlier that we're gonna, focus our conversation on what are some solutions we can provide. In our previous conversations, we've dived deep into the problems that we're facing as a community. And so how can we start to build those positive relationships and trust between police and the community?
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna take a stab at this first, and then I'm gonna ask you guys to chime in too. I think we do a really good job here at the Parkside Police Department here on campus. We are very community oriented. We do a lot of projects. Under a normal world without the mask and COVID and everything else, we would normally be engaged in coffee with a cop and pizza with the police, and we do a lot of programming on campus trying to engage with our community. Officer Kelly and I both guest lectured in a criminal justice class yesterday. So we try to be out there and be as engaged as we can with our community. And like I always say, if I'm willing to take a bullet for you, is it too much to get to know my name and get to know the officers that are here to serve you? But it's a two-way street, and I need people to talk to me and to engage with me and tell me what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, where we can improve, but also being willing to listen. And when you ask a hypothetical question like I got yesterday about a traffic stop, understand that I can't speak intelligently about what another officer does somewhere without the full context, but also without knowing that officer. We're individuals, we're individual people, and sometimes that influences what we do. It isn't supposed to, but we're people. We make mistakes. So understanding that we're people and we're part of the community, and breaking down those barriers that people put up, those false barriers that don't need to be there. I am part of you. I am here to serve you. But if you don't tell me what I need to do, quite honestly, we just go out and do what we think is best for the community. And that isn't always what people want. Sometimes it's writing parking tickets or doing speeding or this or that. And sometimes it's dictated by our supervision, what we need to do, what they think we need to do. And we're not truly doing community policing then, because we're not doing what our community is asking of us. And I always use the example of the barking dog call in the neighborhood, where people are upset about a barking dog in their neighborhood, and officers, we look at that like, really? But that's important to you because that's a quality of life issue for you. In my own neighborhood, I've got some individuals that like to light off fireworks year round. And I've gone and tried to talk to them myself, and then ultimately have to call the city police department to come out and reinforce that. And I know what it's like to be on the other end of that call, but also what it's like to be a citizen. And sometimes we get lost as police officers and forget that really it's kind of a non-call to us, we think, but it's a quality of life issue for our community that we need to address. And that's where I say some of these community policing concepts that we've gotten away from, it was a buzzword in the 80s and early 90s, we've gotten away from that again. And now we still say we do it, but we're not actually doing it. And there's a cost to that, and I think that's why we don't do it. So I think we need to start breaking some of that down. And I understand that it's gonna take some time. This mistrust in us it isn't false. Officers have done the wrong things, and it's on video, and we've seen it, I think early on with Rodney King, I was in the academy in college at that time, and I witnessed that myself and knew it was wrong, but we've systematically seen more and more of that throughout the years. And as a profession, we always say that that's just a few bad apples. But unfortunately, a couple bad apples in the pie makes the pie taste bitter. And we've got to do something to change that. So that's where I think we have to build that back up. And that means officers being available, being open, being out there in our communities and interacting with everybody.
So I would like to address the question, but you talked about a few bad apples spoiling the pie. My question, or one thing that comes to me often is, there's a few bad apples, we'll pick them out. If we get a batch of apples, we pick them out, we get rid of them. I think within any organization, when you see that there's some people not doing the right things, we have to have others who are within that organization who are willing to say, no, this is not right, or call them out on it. Yep. Otherwise, that behavior perpetuates, it continues. So you can't make a pie taste good with the bad apples in it. So that's, that piece. But, Paulette, to your question, as it relates to what can we do to build the trust, you're spot on, Officer Kirk, when you talk about, just being in the community, understanding, building the relationships with the community you serve. Now, I know you guys are stretched thin. You don't always have an opportunity to go out and shoot baskets or jump rope with the girls or anything like that. But it's very important that it becomes a priority to get to know the community that you're policing.
Yes.
They need to know who you are, and you need to know who they are. And, the saying, a dog won't bite someone who feeds them, a dog won't bite someone they know. So the building of relationships, I think, is key, but also education. It can't be incumbent on the community that you police to educate you on how to serve me. And what I mean by that is, I think there should be some diversity and cultural sensitivity training that takes place, and maybe there is, but it should not be a one and done. Right. These trainings have to go on continuously because this is an ongoing issue. If it's a priority to an organization, I think it should be a priority to make sure that those who work inside the organization are informed and educated on who they're serving.
And I think that being in the community and doing that is better than putting on a class, because now you're engaged in that community. You're automatically getting that diversity training the best way you can with your community, the people you're serving.
But the training is important because, you can be out in that community and there's a behavior or a gesture or a movement or a phrase that's said to you, and I know your experience, you've been around, you know it. But some of your newer police officers, they have not had that opportunity to be engaged with those community members. So what is the police department providing for them before they go and hit the streets? Because, I feared for my life, I was afraid. How can we help the police officers not be afraid when they're in situations where there could be potential life or death situations?
Yeah. And I think that again, that's a lot of that trust that's been just divided now on both sides.
Absolutely.
And we've got to get it back together. It's just got to come back together. I never got into this profession, I always say, to divide people. I got into this profession to serve and help people. And that's what makes me so passionate about doing this is I've said it before, we suck as a organization of explaining why we do the things we do. And we need to do more of that, explaining it, so that our community understands why we use the tactics we do. And I encourage people to do ride-alongs and those things, you know. I mean, right now in COVID, I don't know how many agencies are allowing it, I know we wouldn't. But to engage with the agencies, not only the officers to get out and do more policing in their neighborhoods and getting out of the cars and talking to people and doing that, but also our community. You know, there's so many agencies that have different programs where you come and you ride and you train with the officers and learn what it is they do, because what's a better advocate for the police than somebody in the community that understands why they're doing what they do. So I think that's a huge component too, and we need to work on that. So, Paulette, what do you have to add to all this?
Yeah, when I think about building relationships, I think that it's easier, which I've mentioned before, it's easier for the organization to be able to establish exactly how do we do that. And so, of course, there needs, on an individual level, it needs to be on both sides, but there are no structures currently in place for that to thrive, for those relationships to be built. And so I believe there are definitely ways that the police department can be involved in the community. So, for example, there are county board meetings, there are school board meetings, there are plenty of trainings and professional development opportunities for our public service members. So those people who work down at the county buildings. And I believe that police officers and police departments can be involved in that process. And so it's more of a team effort. And so instead of we're just like outsourcing, we don't know what each other does, you know, and there could be more collaboration when it comes to the inception of some of these programs, because you're there, you're at the table, and so is everyone else. And so I think that's a really good way as far as strategically how do we begin to build relationships on a structural level. Because currently that's not going to happen because no one has, I mean, not no one, but a lot of people just don't have access. They're not going to think, oh, let me just call Officer Kurt right now and let's go do a ride along. Right. You have to plan for that, and you have to be strategic about how do we get people to come to us as an organization.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I think we're fortunate here, like I can only speak intelligently about how we focus here on campus, but I think we're a good model because we promote our openness and come talk to us, and you know, we refer to ourselves by our first names, and we only say officer in front of it as respect to the position, not the person, because I don't take myself that serious. But that's important that we do that, and I think a lot of that can come though also from the bottom up, from the officers on the street leading by an example, by doing it versus, because sometimes when it comes from the top down, there isn't good buy-in from the officers. We've talked about this before, but then there's also, it's just a training. It's not, it needs to be more of a lifestyle. It needs to be a way, a conditioning of how we do things. You think about how we live and try to stay fit as a lifestyle instead of a diet, it's a lifestyle change. Same thing in policing. Instead of a training, a lifestyle change. We need to change how we do it.
But the training could be a part of the requirement for the position.
Yes.
You know, and I get what you're saying, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But again, it's including or we're creating those opportunities or requirements, if you will. And I always say, you know, you can have the best trainings, the best workshops across the board, hands down. But if you do not have individuals who are, first of all, seeing that there's a problem or a need for it, or I don't need this training, that's not me, it doesn't apply to me, they're not receiving it, it doesn't matter. You know, it doesn't matter how many trainings you have. So what we have to do is figure out how do we make it personal to that person, to the citizen and to the police officer. How do we make these situations personal where it does matter? You know, if that was my son being shot in the back, you know, how would I feel? And just and personalize it a little bit more, internalize it a little bit more. I think if we can get, and I don't know how you do that, I don't know what the answer is, but I do think that that's an element of it. There are some people who feel like, yep, I know I need training. Yes, I know I need to understand of the cultures of the people better, and I want to. But for that percentage of people who don't want to know, how do we get to them, and what do we do to bring them on board? So, like I said, I don't have an answer for you, but
Yeah.
that's another piece.
And I think some of that is the officers recognizing that, because we've talked about it myself. I didn't recognize that I wasn't sure, just because I treated everybody equally didn't mean that everybody else was doing that.
Right.
And I wasn't recognizing that. So that I was part of, it's gotta be a self-awakening somewhat too. And how do you get to them? I don't know.
Self-awareness.
I've been doing it for 25 years and it took me that long to wake myself up. So I don't know how to do that. I don't know how you find that personalization to get somebody there, other than having these conversations, getting officers out of their cars, doing those things. You know, we've talked about, leaping ahead a little bit, but we've talked about, you know, how can we restructure police departments and things like that. And I think that's part of it too. But there's, what I hate to say is there's a cost to all this. There's a cost to that. Getting officers out there, we talk about the younger officers. I don't think a young officer should be by themselves for that first probably year to 2 years. You know, I look at these young officers now and I want to go over and take their whole gun belt away and say, who gave that? How old are you? Who gave that to you? Like, but I'm older now. And I have to reflect on when I was a brand new officer. I was that young kid. You know, I was sent out, you know, here, go forth in police. Really? And I think about that, and I think, you know, there's things that we need to do to try to make that better.
And I'm gonna stop talking.
No,
But
go ahead.
the other thing I wanna go back to is, you talked about the police department or the organization. How do you get the people to own it or what have you? I do feel if you create a climate and culture within your organization that says, this is important to us, this is how we operate. And if you are not in favor of it, or if you cannot get on board with it, then maybe this is not the organization for you.
Joe just brought that up on here. Joe just brought that up. So, Joe, thanks for reviewing that. You should be taking care of yourself. But I'm glad you threw this in. Joe says, well, if the individual doesn't want to engage in these, why should they even be an officer? And yes, that's true. I don't want to blanket throw good cops out though,
Oh, absolutely.
because I would be one of them. If I hadn't recognized myself, I could have been one of them. And I feel that I'm a good officer and I do a good job here and always have, but I also, and we're not talking a long time ago, we're talking less than 6 months ago, I didn't see that I had a problem, that I thought everything I was doing was fine.
Yeah,
But it's not a one and done. I mean, it's like you have
Right.
to give people time to get on
Right,
board.
right.
So you recognized it, so it takes
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna challenge you on that too, because I think we need to redefine what it means to be a good cop. And although you are a good person,
Mhm.
maybe you weren't such a good cop at that point in time, if that's the mindset, right? And we have to define what does that mean. To your point, if this is important to us as a police department, as a community, to have this mindset of equity and inclusion, then maybe this isn't the role for you, and that might be a part of that restructuring process. Because I can tell you right now, here at Parkside, if in our hiring process, I know that you're trying to figure out, okay, are you really for these students? Are you really passionate about this as a person, as an individual? And that's a part of how, you know, you get the jobs that you do. And I think that policing, that should be a part of that model, that mission. Because even though it may have a cost to it, right? The cost is life or death at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
And Colin, you have to hold the individuals accountable. So you say you bring someone into the organization and you're trying to determine, are you really for the students? Well, if they're working here and they've been here 6, 8, 9
Yeah.
months, a year,
Yeah.
and you have identified that they're not really on board with what we stand for, then there's a change that has to be made.
Mhm.
Either termination, they resign, or a shift in their mindset. So
Yeah, I agree with that.
accountability is key.
And I 100% agree with you guys, because I do the background investigations for officers. I spend an exorbitant amount of time making sure that I'm looking for somebody that I've spent all this time here, that I'm willing to turn the reins over to in a few years, but not have them screw up all my hard work over the years. So I'm looking for, I like to say, I'm looking for a family member, somebody that I'm bringing into our family who has the same morals, the same core values that we do here as an agency and as a community member within our, university. So I look for people like that. And quite often, we also put them through a psychological that also is geared towards, are they of the right mindset for our community here at Parkside? And more times than not, my investigation and that psychological match up pretty well. So I think we do a good job of trying to do that. But to the point of getting rid of those bad apples, easier said than done. Easier said than done, because you can recognize that somebody's in there and they're not doing something right or whatever. We all know what it's like to try to terminate somebody.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, and to be able to document those things so that you can terminate them. Because we're talking about things that are very hard to show that they're not doing their job appropriately or the way we want them to do it.
Well, I think if we keep documentation, it's something and I'm not minimizing,
Yeah.
I know it does, it's easier sounding than it actually is. I recognize how hard it is to, say, terminate an employee, but I do feel like employees will make a decision on their own also. When they see that an organization is not fitting what their own core values are, or they feel that it should be something different, they'll walk away from it as well. But, just because it's hard to terminate, it doesn't mean we should not continue to keep those documentations, to keep bringing them back to, this is how we do it.
Yep.
Oh, you didn't do it right this time. Bring them back to what it is that we want them, how we want them to operate.
Yeah, and again, I think we do,
It's work.
and I hate to always make it sound like we're so great, because we have room for improvement too, but I've been involved in officer terminations here of officers that I didn't see doing the job right or didn't have the right values here. I've been unfortunately involved in quite a few of them. So we've done that here. Doesn't mean that we haven't missed some.
Yeah, and let the record show, I'm not in favor of just terminating police officers. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But I'm speaking just in general terms. It's a police station, if it's an organization, an institution, the bad apples who are spoiling the bunch. That's all.
Right.
So I'm not talking about firing police officers.
But even saying that, we can move right on to topic number 3 and move right into that, where we're talking about.
Yeah, in Camden, New Jersey. So in Camden, New Jersey, the community decided to defund the police and restructure their police department. And so do you believe these efforts can be replicated here in our community?
I think they can. I mean, I really do. I think what they did there was, everybody talks about, they disbanded her. I looked into it, and they didn't just like, this whole department's gone and we're stuck. Because I can't wrap my head around how you would do that without having another agency come in and take over for a period of time or something. But what they did is I think what they saw is they saw an opportunity to get rid of the bad apples. And the easiest way to do it was basically to kind of dissolve the department and restart it. And everybody had to reapply for their jobs. Mm-hmm. And they kept some of the core people in the administration that they felt were the right ones to move them along in that direction. And then they redid it. They rebuilt that agency. And that was a way that they could get rid of people that they either didn't have the values they wanted or weren't going to police the way they wanted. So do I think that could be done? Could that be a model for an agency that is being viewed maybe by outside organizations? I don't know how you decide that an agency as a whole needs to be restructured, or if it can just be done where you're documenting and you're rid of a few. I don't know at what point you decide that and who decides that, whether it's the administration, the mayor's office, whatever, a police and fire commission. I don't know, and I'm not opposed to outside groups having review boards, but also if that outside review board is going to review me, just like I said when they brought up reviewing all of our shootings by outside agencies and things like that, there has to be, those people have to have gone through some kind of a recruit school or an academy to understand what it is we do and how we do it and the laws that apply to us in order to be able to review me. So otherwise, I have no problem with outside groups doing this as long as they've been educated to the level to be able to do that. So I think that could happen and that could be something that we could do. I think it could be done just about anywhere. I mean, until you get into really huge agencies like, LA or New York or something, then it's gotta be almost like by districts. But yeah, I mean, even Milwaukee, I think you'd be hard pressed to do that in such a large agency, but, Kenosha, Racine, some of these that are still big agencies, could it be done? Possibly. I don't know but again, we have to somehow decide that that's a problem in that agency first of all. And who established that? Our community should. Our community should say, listen, we don't value, X, Y, and Z police department and how they're doing this. But I think it's gotta be more of a universal, like, almost like a vote. Like, a vote to say we have no confidence in our police department administration, so that the whole community has an opportunity to have their input in on it, and then I think you move forward. And then if that decision's made, then I think you could replicate what they did there, and keep, a handful of people that basically make them all reapply for their jobs. And that's a way that I hate to say it, but that's a way how you get around the HR aspect of it, is you've recreated the police department, everybody's reapplying for their jobs, you either get it or you don't, and that's how you get rid of the bad apples without having to do all that documentation. So I think that was the mentality that they used there was, well, we can't go around picking here, because unions and everything else are gonna get in the way, but, here's a way we can do it. We're just gonna get rid of the police department and start over. So I think that's a possibility.
Yeah, and I also want to add that when they did restructure and start over, there are some culture changes that did happen. So
Huge.
it talked about, officers were trained to hold their fire when possible, especially when confronting people wielding knives and showing signs of mental illness, and to engage in conversation when commands of drop the knife don't work. And so this sometimes required backing up at a safer distance or relying on patience rather than anything on an officer's belt. And that's from a New York Times article.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a benefit of starting fresh, is like now we get to say, hey, this is what's important to us and this is how we're gonna do it now.
Right. And like I always said, as being a defense and arrest tactics instructor and teaching officers how to handle these situations, I've always said, number one is your appearance, number one, your uniform, that's number one. Number two is the dialogue, which should be the most important thing, is how you interact with that person. And then, when everything else has dropped, then you go to whatever means you have to at that point. They're very famous for a incident where they basically surrounded an individual with a knife and kind of kept that kind of a bubble around them and kept talking until they talked him into dropping the knife and being able to take him into custody. Again, there are situations where you can't do that. It doesn't happen that way, but recognizing opportunities and taking the time, that's where I think sometimes officers get rushed. And sometimes it's based on the agency. Going call to call. Kelly and I talk about it quite frequently, that we're very fortunate here that we don't have a call volume that puts us in a point where we can't sit and have dialogue with somebody and try to explain to them. I've done it many times where I've talked people into handcuffs, try to have that conversation and ultimately talk them into it, all right, fine, and explain to them what's gonna happen if they don't comply. Here's what's gonna happen if you don't do this. Here's what's gonna happen if you don't do this. Here's, and explaining to them. And it's no different, I've said it numerous times, it's no different when you're this old or 80 years. One of the first things we learn to ask is why? Well, it's no different out there. It's just sometimes we're not afforded the opportunity to explain it right then and there. Like I always tell people, listen, I can't stand here on the side of the road and debate this traffic ticket with you. That's why I'm giving you the ticket, so that you can go to court and argue that there. That's the appropriate venue for that. We don't hold court out here. But just taking the time to do that is a big thing, to explain to you, listen, I agree you disagree with the citation, but here it is, here's where you have to go, that's where we argued this venue about this. And if I'm so ordered to be there, I will be there, and we can discuss it more. But taking that time to do that, we quite frequently don't do that. And that's something that's something that can be done in training anywhere, telling officers, we need to take a little bit more time, put a pause, we talk about de-escalation and we teach the breathing techniques to officers when they're in car chases, stuff like that. because we've seen too often officers put themselves in jeopardy, but also put themselves in potential situations that they didn't need to be in, because at the end of that car chase, the adrenaline's up there, and they're so focused on that and getting up and arresting that person that they put themselves in a situation that they didn't need to. Hang back, car stopped, or they crashed or whatever. If you don't need to go up there and render aid right away, don't. Wait for other officers to get, and maybe have them go approach when they're not in the mindset that you are. So.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
It's off topic, and
Yeah.
I just want to get your thoughts on it. You talk about these heightened situations. What's the point of where you pursue it or you let it go? Now, I know that your job is to, make sure that everything is, proper, everybody's safe. So, for example, you're in a car. There's a car chase,
Mhm.
stolen vehicle,
Mhm.
and then they're going down the highway, and potentially they're going into traffic, and there's pedestrians and whatnot. Where is there a line, or is there a point where you say, you know what? There are too many there could be too much collateral damage for me to try and pursue this person because they've stolen a car. Not saying that that's okay,
Right.
but the stolen car, the value of the stolen car versus
The value of
the
somebody getting
value
hurt or
of
killed.
someone, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
What's that line to?
Every agency's different. Every agency's different. Every agency's got its own policies and procedures for that. And we've seen the city of Milwaukee, they were ridiculed for getting in car chases, and then they stopped doing it, and they were ridiculed for letting these people run all over Milwaukee and crash and things like that. So now they're, it's finding that happy medium there. If it's not something where it's gonna put people's lives in jeopardy, that you could let them go, and you've got a license plate or something like that, we can go find that car later.
Right.
Or if it's a stolen car, maybe we can do something, maybe we can't. Sometimes you back off and you let them, and you do what's called paralleling. You have other officers that are paralleling that chase, you break off and terminate it, and then you drive at a safe, normal speed abiding by all the traffic rules, and you just let them continue. And if you catch back up to them, or they stop or something, because that's happened, and then they pull up to a house or they pull into a garage, and then another officer pulls up and says, oh,
Yeah.
here you go. So it's different, and then we have what's called officer override or supervisor override. I've had to do this with another officer, where I'm not part of the chase. I was in the PD, I heard them on the chase, it was winter time, they weren't really exceeding posted speeds and things like that, but they were heading into the city, it was heavier populated, and it was for a simple traffic violation, where I got on the radio, I said, just terminate it. Like, don't put people at risk for something stupid.
Right.
So just let it go. And right after I called up the termination, he called back and said, well, they just stopped. So then, all right, we'll go ahead and continue now, obviously, but, there's those things too, but it's recognizing that. And sometimes it takes an outside officer to kind of come in and go, time out. You're kind of amped up right now, and we all get that way. I've been in a couple of chases, I've had to deal with that, where you get, but it's also recognizing that too, and that's why we teach breathing techniques and everything else to officers to help them get themselves back under control as far as not having tunnel vision and thinking more clearly, because we all know the better you have oxygen, the more clearly you think. So we teach those things.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going on.
Yeah, no, that's all
you're
right.
fine.
Again, but that's part of
Yeah.
educating everybody why we do the things we do.
Yeah, and I would like to say too, I think a lot of that is just your own personal wisdom and your, what you know to be a good decision, right? So can you tell us a little bit about another time in which you did that, a situation where there's a student on campus that did not end up in a shooting, although it could have based on what you and other officers are trying to do, so.
Yeah, so this was just a few years back. Officer Kelly and I, we had interactions with this student on campus several times. We recognized that there was potentially some mental health issues, and that he might not be taking medications, or he might not be taking enough of his medications. Either way, we could recognize that something wasn't right and he was gradually getting worse. We had gone to a couple minor situations with him, but we recognized it was gonna elevate. It was gonna get to the point where we were gonna have to get physical with him, and we were gonna have to take him into custody at some point. And unfortunately, he wasn't going to classes, but he wasn't missing a day at the gym. So he was a very physically intimidating man, and I like to think that I'm in shape, but I was not gonna get in a hands-on tussle with him and come out ahead. It wasn't gonna happen. What ended up happening is he was right here in this building, he was using somebody else's card to get food. And they're shutting down there, you know, that's not the person, they take the card. He got quite upset about that. Started yelling at them, everything else, we were called. Responded, he was already gone. But when they told us, you know, well, who gave us a description of us, we knew who it was. So he was gone, we left, we knew where he lived. I went there to see if he was there, he wasn't there. Unfortunately, I had somebody else come in for an interview on another crime. I was in the middle of an interview with them when Officer Kelly came back up to get a statement from the folks here in food service. While she was there, he showed back up. Kelly then tried to engage with him and talk to him in a civil manner, explaining to him, listen, he wasn't having it. He just wasn't listening, wasn't complying. He became very disjointed in his conversation, but also very loud. And we asked him several times, well, she had asked him several times, you know, you need to slow down. Well, then she calls for assistance over the radio, and I can hear him yelling in the background. So I have to tell this individual in the interview room, not under arrest, but you're not free to go, I'll be back. And I have to leave him. I leave him, I drive up, and I immediately start engaging with him. Now, I had just had a conversation with him either a couple days or no more than a week prior. So I felt we had a little bit of a dialogue and spoke to him, you know, by first name, tried to explain to him. He had prior military experience, we believe that he was only in for a short time because they recognized his mental health illness and jettisoned him from the military. Again, this is where we drop the ball with folks. So he was there, I was talking to him. Ultimately, it came to, I kept explaining to him, listen, you know, you need to calm down, this, that, and the other. He just continued. I said, okay, well, you know, you're not abiding by the law. And quite a few people in there were, you know, all watching and everything. I don't know if anybody had any cell phone. We never heard about cell phone video. We had our body cameras on. And I ultimately told him, I said, well, you're under arrest. Okay? I said, I'm gonna need you to place your hands behind your back, everything else. One part to understand was we were in the transition of our taser guns on our belts, so we did not have that. This would have been a great application for it when we get into this a little bit further. We were transitioning, so we didn't have that. So that was one tool we did not have. He, at one point, after we had talked to many, I mean, we were there for a long time trying to talk him into this. He at one point put his hands behind his back. I said, okay. I maneuvered behind him. Officer Kelly maneuvered in front of him, off to the side. We were tactically the way you should be. And as soon as I started placing handcuffs, I mean, as soon as he felt that metal on his wrist, it was a fight. And started fighting with us. Officer Kelly grabbed the front of him, trying to keep his arms behind his back while I was trying to, again, jump at him. He was very physically fit. There was no way I was getting him handcuffed. I told Kelly, you know, go ahead and hit him, and she knew right away what I meant. Hit him with pepper spray. So she sprayed him with pepper spray. I'm behind him, kind of trying to hide behind him, but I got a face full of it too. She gave him a pretty good douse to the face, didn't work. We continued fighting. I said, hit him again. She does it again. She empties her can. Didn't work. I'm now coughing and gagging. He's unaffected. So then Kelly jettisoned that and went to her baton. And she was going to strike him with the baton. As soon as she did so, she had to release his arm to grab the baton and open it. As soon as she did that, he was able to spin around, took off running. Now we're in a foot chase. Chase him out of the building, around, out the grounds, right out here, and towards housing. I was not keeping up with him. I actually had a cracked rib at the time, so I wasn't able to keep up with him. He gradually got to the forest, broke away. I thought, all right, I'll go to where he lives, because I know that, well, Officer Kelly came around, we met each other, we're like, where is he? I don't know. So we figured he got off into the woods, that's fine. We'll catch up with him later, but we're gonna try to find him. So we called for assistance from the sheriff's department. They brought a canine unit out, and we started searching for him. I had to get back to my squad car. As I got to my squad car, started driving it back. During this, my body camera went flying, it was useless. As soon as we started struggling, it went flying. Got a great view of the ceiling and underneath the register for a little while, things like that, but it was useless. I got back to my squad, started driving that way. As I did, I can hear Kelly on the radio. He's out of the woods, this, that, and other. I come driving around, there's deputies in the area, everything else in the canine unit. And what had happened is he came out of the woods, he had stripped off his shirts and that, went in the river, washed all the pepper spray off, came out, now he's shirtless with a backpack on, and goes running up the bike path towards the sports activity center. As he's doing that, Kelly gets in her squad car and is paralleling him and yelling commands out her squad car at him. They go up, he's just not listening. She's like, please, they're gonna release the dog. This, that, and other, just, he's yelling at her, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me. She pulls up, gets to the top of the hill, pulls across, gets out of the squad, has the squad between her and him. And again, he's still yelling, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me. She said, just cooperate, they're gonna release the dog. At this point, the canine officer's dog's locked onto him, and he releases the dog. Prior to getting to Kelly, the dog grabs him, takes him to the ground. Officers are able to get there, get him into custody. Took him to the hospital for treatment. He was refusing treatment. It probably took us an hour to talk him into allowing them to treat him. He had a large chunk out of the back of his leg from where the dog bit him. We were just trying to get that cleaned and stitched up, and he just wasn't allowing it. It was a long process to go through this, but it could have been very different. I'm not saying that we were perfect, because there was things we could have done better, but there was also things that could have gone very different. We found a knife on him, ended up being my knife that came off of my vest, because when I was struggling with him, he had a backpack, a water backpack on, and it had all those little loops on it. And what happened is I carry a knife on my vest here, and the hook on it got hooked on that. So officers, they were like, he's got a knife. I'm like, wait a minute, that's my knife, And we realized what had happened later, but it could have gone very differently. And at one point, the sheriff's department was all there, and people were outraged because they said that the officers all had their guns pointed at. For us, our taser guns are bright yellow. The sheriff's departments are black. They had their taser guns pointed at. When people driving by, people at the parking lots, everybody was watching this. Everybody said we had guns pointed at them. Now, the part that I leave out is the fact that he's African American. So it looks very bad, and people were very outraged at that. And we spent a long time trying to explain, listen, they weren't guns, they were the taser guns. Yes, they had them pointed at them, but you don't even know what all happened prior to that and why they were doing that. So it was just, it could have resulted in a very different outcome. But I think the officers that were there and how they handled it, not just myself and Kelly, but the sheriff deputies that were there, the way that we handled it was just, it was the best outcome we could have asked for at that point in time. Because, again, what do we do? Do we let him run around? And he's not in a good mental state. What is he gonna do? Now he knows the police are looking for him. What is he gonna do? Where is he gonna go? Is he gonna end up back in his room? Great, that's a good outcome. Then we can go there and grab him up. But how do we handle that? And again, could we have done things differently? Could the results maybe have been better? Yes, but this is what we were handed at the time. And that's what a lot of times people don't understand is we're called to a situation, we're presented this, and we have to deal with it. How do we deal with it? And we have to deal with it based on our training and our experience. And if you don't have the right training, or you don't have the experience or the level of experience that a veteran officer might have, you might do it differently. And again, we were without a tool. That would have been a perfect opportunity to tase him right then and there. And then we could have got him into custody and nobody would have been hurt, nothing would have happened. None of that running, none of the business in the woods, and he never would have been bitten either. Again, we didn't have all the tools we needed. So when we talk about some of these things, I hate using the term of defund the police, but reallocating some of these funds, not only do we, yes, we need to reallocate funds to things that need to be dealt with, like mental health illness, but we also need to better fund our officers and the equipment and training that they have so that they can do their job better and safer for both the officers and our citizens. So.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I do have another question too, specifically regarding that story.
Mhm.
Do you know what happened after he was refusing treatment? Do you normally refer to a mental health facility or a counseling therapist?
Again, this is where our society just drops the ball on all these things. I can't do anything with you as far as until you have deemed yourself to the point where you're a threat to yourself or others, that I can force you into what we call a mental health commitment, where we take you to the hospital and you force. And again, we don't necessarily make that determination. We bring you there, and they bring in people from the outside that evaluate, and then they decide. And I've got my whole issue with that too, because I've done it for many, many years without that, and they changed it. I think that was all, I don't want to say it was all a financial issue, but a lot of it was, because we don't have facilities in Kenosha County for those folks to go to, so we have to transport them out of county. That's a cost, all that. Again, we dropped the ball for that, but we weren't able to force that. Now the university can force or say you can't come back to our campus until you have done X, Y, and Z. They have that ability if you're living on campus, or part of student conduct through the university. They actually have more power to handle it than we do. So were those things put in place? Yes. Unfortunately, he left the university and then had an incident in the city of Milwaukee where he's no longer with us now. Again, because I think I had talked to him both prior to the point where we were at and at that point, and it was talking to two different people. And he just needed help. He just needed help. And unfortunately, at that point, we've got to physically take him and force him into getting some help. I think it could have resulted differently had we had the right things in place. And again, that goes back to not only do the officers need to be funded better, but we need community resources that are funded better to deal with that. That is not something for us to deal with. Mm-hmm. That is something for our community resources to deal with and get him appropriate care, whoever it is. So that's why I like, as tragic as the story is, that's why I like using it, because it was an example that Kelly and I, both veteran trained officers, were put in an unfortunate situation that we recognized was gonna happen. We recognized it a week prior. We said, he's on that downward spiral, something's gonna happen, and it did. I gladly it happened the way it did, because I unfortunately had said at that time it's gonna end up in us shooting him. Because I strongly felt that was gonna end up being the result, that it was gonna be this crazy fight, brawl, and to the point where, myself or somebody else is gonna have to take deadly force, because he's gonna either kill one of us or somebody else.
Did you want to add to that?
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, and I think that it also speaks to some of the work we can do as a community preventatively as well, because you did mention, like, you saw it coming, and I'm sure a lot of people around him maybe saw things like that coming too.
There were people across campus that recognized it, but unfortunately, the mental health portion where we can get involved or anybody can force that is reactionary. It's not proactive.
Yeah, and so maybe that is another way of restructuring, just an idea of putting out there that you're a part of both the proactive and the reactionary process. But
So
yeah.
how much training is involved with, as it relates to mental health? As police officers, how much training do you need, or is there any?
Unfortunately, very little for new officers coming out. Our department, all of our officers are crisis intervention trained officers, which means they've done bare minimum 40 hours of training is the course that they go through. And I think over half of us are advanced training, which means we've gone to another additional 40 hours. So still, it's only 80 hours. Now, some of us have additional life experience. I worked at a mental health facility before I became a police officer. So I have that to bring to the table also. So that helps, but not everybody has that. And again, that's something that's been brought to the Kenosha community, and I know a majority, I shouldn't say a majority, I know a lot of both city and county officers have gotten the training, and that was through outside funding.
Mhm. So after the 40 hours that you initially get, no other hours are required?
Is there continuing?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
no. Should there be? Yes. But even when I first got it to when I went to the advanced course, it was probably 2-3 years. Because again, there was no funding for it. It was privately funded.
Mhm.
So it wasn't funded through the agencies because it was expensive. And you can't think of just the training. That's what people, they say, oh, more training. Well, here's the problem with training is we have to send all the officers. So now you have to backfill on different shifts. It causes overtime too, and a lot of times that's not covered as part of the cost. Say you get a grant or something like that, that's not part of it. So in that particular grant, it was equated in there so that we could backfill and have, because now you're reducing the number of officers you have out there to handle calls, which just adds more on to the officers that are out there working that day or night.
You know, this, it speaks to me because I have, my youngest son, he's 19. He is on the autism spectrum, so he's high functioning, but there are certain things, I just like any African-American mom with boys, you fear for certain things, you know. And if he were to be stopped and the compliance piece, you know, he's processing, as you're saying, especially if you're yelling at him, he's processing. He may not be moving as quickly as you may want, or as a police officer may want, and that may be considered non-compliant. I don't know what would happen. So the whole training of the mental health piece in training is something, you know, it speaks to me personally that it makes me afraid. Not only for my son, but for even that young man you spoke. Lucky for him, you and Officer Kelly knew, you know, about his condition, but.
Well, we didn't know that he had one.
Well,
we assumed it. We
yes.
assumed it. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
We basically profiled it.
Yeah.
We said, based on how our interactions are with him, we feel that he's. I mean, we were right, but So, but also feel comfortable knowing that a lot of the officers in our local communities and statewide are getting more and more of that aspect and the CIT training. And one thing that everybody can look for if you're on the spectrum or you have a person a loved one, a family or friend, is if officers are being sent to deal with them, ask for a CIT trained officer. Ask for that. And you can recognize it because they wear a gold button with a blue state of Wisconsin in it, and it says crisis intervention training. It's small, but they wear that button, and that's another way you can recognize that an officer is CIT trained. And I quite frequently tell people, do that, ask for that. If you know you have a loved one or somebody of that point, you need to do that. But I know we gotta wrap things up, and we can talk forever, but these are the conversations we gotta have, folks.
Yes, thank you for joining in. Please join us again next week. Again, you are more than welcome to ask questions in our comment section on Instagram and on Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help us change the world. help us change the world.